It started in the most ordinary way. Not with fireworks, not with some movie-worthy meet-cute. Just a quiet Tuesday morning at the corner coffee shop, the one that smelled faintly of burnt beans and wet newspapers. I was leaning on the counter, scrolling through a half-written text to a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. My thumb hovered over the send button, then locked the screen instead. That was becoming a habit, typing more words than I ever let leave the draft box. She came in then. Mrs. Hale, my friend Evan's mom. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her, at least in passing. She had that kind of presence where you didn't have to turn your head to notice her. You just felt the air shift slightly when she walked into a room. Mid-40s, always put together without trying. Today she wore a navy coat, her hair pulled back with strands escaping, like she'd hurried but hadn't bothered to fix it. Somehow that made her more striking. Same as always? The barista asked. She smiled in that small, almost apologetic way. Yes, please. She didn't see me at first. I caught myself watching the way her fingers smoothed the edge of the paper sleeve on her cup while she waited. A quiet rhythm. Tap, press, release. My eyes flicked away quickly, pretending to study the menu I already knew by heart. When she did notice me, she tilted her head. You're Evan's friend, right? From the college? I nodded. Yeah. Sam. Sam. She repeated it like she was trying the name out. Then, you always order the mocha. With an extra shot. It startled me that she remembered. Oh yeah? Guilty. I gave a half shrug. Her laugh was quiet, more like an exhale. I'm good at noticing small things. Occupational hazard. I didn't ask what occupation she meant. I was too aware of how close she was standing. The faint scent of her perfume. Something clean, not floral, more like soap and sun-warmed fabric. We ended up sharing the small counter near the window, coffees balanced between napkins. For a while, we just looked out at the drizzle streaking the glass. It wasn't awkward exactly, but it wasn't comfortable either. More like holding your breath without realizing. She broke the silence. Evan told me you're writing something? For school. Trying to, I said. Mostly just deleting paragraphs. She gave me a side glance, the kind people use when they're testing if you're telling the truth. That sounds familiar. We talked a little after that. Nothing important. Weather, how the cafe always played the same 3 songs, how her upstairs neighbors left their laundry in the dryer too long. The kind of talk that doesn't matter on paper, but somehow matters when it's the only thing keeping 2 people from the silence pressing in. I noticed her fold her napkin into smaller and smaller squares, aligning the edges carefully before setting it down. My fingers mirrored hers without thinking, crumpling mine into tighter folds, as if my hands needed something to do besides fidget. When her phone buzzed, she checked it and sighed. Then she looked at me, almost guilty for cutting the moment short. I should go, of course. I tried to sound casual. She stood, slipping on her coat. At the door she paused, half-turned. Sam. Yeah. Her voice lowered, steady but with a weight I couldn't quite place. This stays between us, okay? Before I could answer, she was gone, the bell above the door jingling after her. I sat there with a cooling mocha, staring at the folded napkin between my fingers, wondering what exactly I'd just agreed to. Without saying a word, I didn't see her again for almost a week. Not at the cafe, not in the parking lot, not even when I half pretended to linger by the stairwell where our mailboxes were. I told myself I wasn't waiting, but the way my ears pricked at the sound of footsteps above mine gave me away. When it finally happened, it was late evening. I was coming back from the library with a bag of books I'd probably skim and never finish. The hallway light on the second floor buzzed faintly, casting everything in a dull yellow. She was there, crouched in front of her door, bags of groceries beside her, keys dangling uselessly from her hand. Of course, she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. I slowed. Everything okay? She looked up, a little startled. Then she smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Door's stuck again. It swells when it rains. I keep meaning to tell the landlord. I shifted my bag to one shoulder. Want me to try? She hesitated, then handed me the keys. Our fingers brushed in the exchange, barely a touch, but enough to jolt me like static. I fit the key in and leaned my weight against the door until it gave with a creak. There, I stepped back, suddenly aware of how close we were in the narrow hall. "Thank you," she said softly. She picked up her grocery bags, then added, "Do you want tea?" Just to say thanks. I should have said no. I knew that. But I followed her in anyway. Her apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something warm, maybe vanilla. Bookshelves lined one wall, not neatly arranged but crowded with paperbacks and stray magazines. She disappeared into the kitchen, calling over her shoulder. "Evan always teases me for hoarding tea flavors. I never finish a box." I sat carefully at the edge of the couch, setting my bag at my feet. When she returned, she had two mismatched mugs, steam curling from both. She handed me one, her hand brushing mine again. "This one's ginger. Good for everything, apparently." We drank in silence for a while. The kind of silence that hummed with things not said. My eyes drifted to a framed photo on the shelf. Her, Evan, and what must have been his dad. They all looked younger, caught in that frozen happiness of posed pictures. I wondered if he still lived here, or if the photo was just a relic she couldn't take down. She must have noticed my gaze. "Divorced. 6 years now." She said it simply, no bitterness, no drama. Then, after a pause, "People assume you get used to being alone. You don't really. You just stop explaining it." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, my throat tight. She smiled faintly, almost apologizing for saying too much. "Anyway, that's not your problem." I set my mug down carefully on the table, lining the handle with the edge. "It's not a problem," I said, though my voice came out quieter than I meant. Her eyes lingered on me, searching. For what, I didn't know, but it felt like standing under a light too bright to ignore. We talked more after that, about small things. How the upstairs pipes rattled at night, how she hated grocery shopping, how she once tried painting the living room herself, but gave up halfway through. I told her about the part-time job I hated, how I sometimes walked the long way home just to avoid going back to an empty apartment. Somewhere in the middle of that, I realized I was leaning closer without noticing. Or maybe she was. The air between us had thinned. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. For a moment, we just hovered there, like neither of us wanted to break whatever thread had stretched between us. Then, lightly, almost absent-mindedly, she reached out and straightened the collar of my jacket. "There," she murmured. Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat too long. I laughed softly, but my chest felt tight. "Thanks." She smiled, small and unreadable. "Good night, Sam." Walking back to my apartment, I touched the spot where her hand had been, as if the warmth might still be there. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It happened again on a Sunday afternoon. Rain tapping against the windows, the building humming with the muffled sounds of neighbors cooking, televisions too loud. I'd gone down to do laundry, only to find every machine in use. So I carried the basket back up, a little annoyed, until I saw her door open. She leaned against the frame, hair damp like she'd been caught in the rain earlier. Stuck with wet clothes. I lifted the basket, sheepish. Yeah, apparently, everyone had the same idea. Her smile was quick, then gone. "You can use mine. Washer's small, but it works." Inside, the apartment felt warmer than before, lived in. A book half open on the table. 2 mugs still on the counter. She helped me load the machine, sleeves pushed up, her wrist brushing mine as we shoved the clothes in. I noticed how careful she was, deliberate in her movements, like slowing herself down on purpose. We ended up sitting on the couch while the machine churned. The rain made the room feel quieter somehow. She tucked her legs under herself, holding a mug of tea, while I sat stiffly on the edge, not sure if I should relax or leave. After a while, she asked, "You ever wonder how people see you? From the outside?" I hesitated. "Sometimes, but I figure they don't really." She gave a soft laugh. "They do. More than you'd think." Then, quieter, "You remind me of Evan." "Not exactly. Just the way you don't fill the silence." I looked at her, unsure if that was meant to be comforting. Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. Sharp. Familiar. "Mom." My chest tightened. Evan's voice. She stood quickly, setting her mug down, smoothing her hair like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. She opened the door only a crack. Evan, what are you doing here? Forgot my jacket. Thought I left it here. His voice carried, casual, not suspicious. Yet, she stepped into the hall, blocking the view inside. I sat frozen, listening to the muffled exchange, her promising to look, his footsteps retreating down the stairwell. When she came back, she leaned against the door, exhaling slowly. Our eyes met. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The washer hummed in the background like it knew too much. Finally, she sat again, but at a slight distance now. She folded her hands, stared at them. This is complicated. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words jammed in my throat. Instead, I reached for my tea, fingers brushing hers as she did the same. The touch lingered, just a breath too long, until we both pulled back at once. Her eyes flicked to my mouth, then away. Mine did the same. The air shifted, like gravity tugging us closer, though neither of us moved. I thought she might. I almost did. But then the washer buzzed, loud and insistent, snapping the moment in half. She stood. Your clothes are ready. And just like that, the line we almost crossed dissolved back into silence that we ran into each other by accident again. At least, that's what I told myself. I'd been walking home from the bus stop, earphones in, but no music playing, when I saw her sitting alone on the bench near the park entrance. A paper bag of groceries at her feet, her shoulders slouched in a way I hadn't seen before. She looked up when I stopped. Sam. A small smile, tired at the edges. You okay? Just resting. Groceries got heavier than I expected. I gestured to the bag. Want me to carry them? She hesitated, then slid it toward me with a quiet thanks. We walked together, slower than usual. The sun had dipped low, everything washed in that soft amber light that makes the world feel almost forgiving. She kept her hands in her coat pockets, her steps neat and measured. Mine felt clumsy beside hers, like I couldn't decide whether to keep pace or fall back. The silence stretched until she broke it. Evan came by yesterday. I nodded, not sure what else to say. He asked if I'd seen you around. Said you haven't been answering texts. I swallowed. Yeah, been busy, I guess. She gave me a side glance, the kind that wasn't sharp but cut anyway. You're avoiding him. I didn't answer. My jaw worked against the words that wanted to come out, but didn't. After a beat, she sighed. This isn't fair to you. The way she said it, gentle, final, made something inside me snap. Then why? I stopped, breath catching. Why do you keep letting me in? We stopped walking. She turned toward me, the faintest crease in her brow. Because I shouldn't. And because sometimes I don't know how not to. Her voice was low, but it carried, steady as the breeze around us. I felt my throat tighten. You think I don't know this is wrong? That I don't feel guilty every time I see you? She flinched, like the word itself had weight. You're 20. You should be out with people your own age. Not. She cut herself off, looked down at her hands twisting in her coat pocket. I wanted to laugh, but it came out hollow. People my age don't look at me. Not the way you do. Her eyes flicked up, sharp with something between fear and recognition. For a long moment, we just stood there, the world narrowing to that thin stretch of air between us. She stepped back first, shaking her head slightly. Sam, don't say it. The words slipped out before I could catch them. My chest felt too tight, my hands useless at my sides. Just don't. We started walking again, slower this time. The bag felt heavier in my hands. At her building, she stopped at the bottom step, turned to face me. For once, she didn't smooth her hair or reach for her keys. She just looked at me, eyes tired but open in a way that made it hard to breathe. When you were helping me with the laundry, she said quietly, I almost forgot who you were. That scared me. Her words landed heavier than any silence. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, that every time she smiled at me, it rewrote the room, and every time she pulled back, I rehearsed what it would be like if she didn't. But the words jammed in my throat, like always. Instead, I set the grocery bag down at her feet. My hand brushed hers as I straightened up. Neither of us pulled away. She inhaled slowly, lips parting as if to speak. But she didn't. The stairwell was quiet, the kind of quiet where you could hear the shift of someone's breathing. Her hand was still close to mine. Too close. She whispered, almost to herself. What are we doing? And I didn't have an answer. After that night on the stairwell, something shifted. Not a clean break, not a confession either, just a quiet tilt of gravity. For 2 days, I caught myself walking slower past her floor, waiting for the sound of her door. For 2 days, I found excuses to stay home, just in case she knocked. But she didn't. And when I finally saw her again, it was different. She was coming out of the building as I was going in, keys jangling in her hand. Her hair was tied back tight, her coat buttoned higher than usual, like she was bracing against something colder than the weather. She gave me a quick nod, too quick, and kept walking. I almost called after her, but the words dried up in my throat. Later that evening, I tried knocking. My hand hovered just above the wood, but I never made contact. Instead, I heard voices through the door. Not hers alone. A man's. Low, familiar enough to make my stomach twist. It wasn't until the next day that Evan mentioned it casually, almost in passing. My dad's been visiting Mom again. Weird, right? After all these years. I nodded like it was nothing, like my chest wasn't hollowing out by the second. The next week blurred. I didn't go to the cafe. I stopped answering her occasional messages, small things at first, like, "Did you ever finish that essay?" Or, "Don't forget the laundry room closes at 9. Messages that had nothing in them and everything in them. I drafted replies, erased them, drafted again, left them unsent. Meanwhile, I kept imagining her sitting at her table, 2 mugs of tea again, except this time one wasn't for me. Or her on the bench, only not alone. Her laugh, the one she tried to hide, aimed somewhere else. I told myself it was none of my business. That whatever existed between us had always been temporary, something fragile enough to collapse the second it touched the outside world. But then, one evening, she showed up at my door. No warning, no pretense, just standing there, hands clasped tight in front of her, as if to keep them from reaching out. "I haven't seen you around," she said. Her voice was careful, measured. "I've been busy," I answered, though even I didn't believe it. A silence stretched, full of things neither of us wanted to be the first to say. Then, softly, she admitted, "He's not coming back. My ex. It's just, Evan asked him to visit, and I couldn't say no. But it doesn't mean anything." I searched her face, trying to find the truth in the way her eyes shifted, the way her shoulders stayed stiff. She must have seen the doubt in mine, because she added quickly, "I thought you should know." It should have been a relief. Instead, it left me more tangled than before. We stood there for another moment, both waiting for the other to bridge the distance. Neither of us did. Eventually, she gave a small nod, almost like a bow, and left without another word. That night, I opened my phone, typed, "Do you want to talk?" Stared at it until the letters blurred. Then I deleted it. I lay awake with the unsent words burning behind my eyelids. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence that it was late when it happened. Too late for visitors, too late for excuses. I was rinsing a mug in my sink when I heard the knock. 3 short raps, then silence. I didn't move at first, just stood there with the water running, heartbeat loud in my ears. By the time I opened the door, she was already turning away. "Mrs. Hale," I said, voice catching. She stopped, turned back slowly. The hallway light was dim, painting shadows under her eyes. She looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen her. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's late." "It's okay." I stepped aside. "Do you want to come in?" She hesitated, then nodded once. Inside, she stood by the table, her coat still on, her hands twisting at the sleeves. I set the mug down, tried not to stare. The silence pressed in, heavier than usual. Finally, she spoke. I keep telling myself to stop, to keep a distance. It should be easy, shouldn't it? She gave a dry laugh, shook her head. But every time I try, I find myself here instead. Her words felt like a crack in something we'd both been holding up too long. I wanted to say everything at once. How I replayed her voice when I couldn't sleep, how my chest ached with the weight of what we weren't saying. But what came out was small, almost boyish. "I thought you didn't want to see me anymore." Her eyes softened, but she didn't step closer. "I thought it was better for you if I didn't." I swallowed hard. "And now?" She looked down at her hands, then up at me again. There was something raw there, almost frightened. Now I don't know what's better for either of us. The room seemed smaller, like the air had thickened. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my voice. I don't care if it's better. I stopped, words faltering. I don't want to pretend it's nothing. Her breath caught. She moved then, slowly, like testing the weight of each step, until she was standing close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her mouth. "This is dangerous, Sam," she whispered. "I know." We stayed like that, suspended in the space between risk and retreat. My hand twitched at my side, wanting to reach for hers, but afraid of breaking whatever fragile honesty had finally surfaced. She must have seen it, because she lifted her hand first, lightly, hesitantly, and touched my sleeve. Not a grab, not even a hold. Just a touch, enough to make my breath hitch. "I can't promise you anything," she said, voice low. "I can't even promise I won't change my mind tomorrow." "I don't want promises," I answered. "I just want this. Right now." Her eyes searched mine, as if testing whether I meant it. Then, for the first time, she let her shoulders drop. The tension eased, not gone but softened, like a wound finally admitting it hurt. She gave the smallest smile, barely there, but real. "Okay." The words settled between us, quiet but solid. Not a declaration, not a vow. Just a human thread, simple and fragile, holding us both steady for the moment. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The silence carried enough. When she finally pulled her hand back, the warmth lingered on my sleeve. I knew nothing was solved, but I also knew we'd stop pretending that IT didn't change overnight. There were still mornings when I sat in the coffee shop alone, scrolling through half-written messages I never sent. There were still evenings when her apartment lights stayed off longer than I expected, and I wondered if I'd imagined the warmth in her smile that night in my kitchen. But slowly, something shifted. Not with grand gestures, but with small ones. She started showing up again, sometimes in the stairwell, sometimes at the bench near the park, sometimes just at the grocery store where she'd slip an extra box of ginger tea into her cart without looking at me. I carried her bags more often than not. She teased me about my terrible laundry habits. We never talked about what we were, only about what was right in front of us. And somehow that was enough. Months passed that way. Routines softened into familiarity. Once, she caught me outside at exactly 8:47 a.m., the time her bus usually came, and laughed when she realized I'd been pretending to wait for mine. We ended up sharing her thermos of black coffee on the bench, passing it back and forth in comfortable silence. Another time, I came home to find a paperback slid under my door. No note, just a book she thought I'd like. I left one for her a week later, and without ever discussing it, the exchange became our thing. Quiet trades, like postcards no one else was meant to read. Evan never asked questions. Maybe he didn't see, or maybe he chose not to. Either way, the silence around us stayed intact, fragile but holding. The first time she reached for my hand in public, it wasn't planned. We were walking back from the store, her umbrella tilting too far in the wind, and instinctively, she grabbed me for balance. She didn't let go right away. Neither did I. We just kept walking, our steps clumsy at first, then natural. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a promise. But it was real. Her apartment still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and vanilla. My own still felt half lived in, but less empty now that I carried pieces of her world inside it. A mug she'd given me when I kept forgetting mine at her place, a stray book of hers I never returned. We still had pauses. Long ones. The kind where you hear the clock tick louder than usual. But the difference was, I didn't fear them anymore. She didn't either. One night, we sat at her table with mugs of tea, mine black, hers ginger. Rain pattered softly against the window. She looked at me, steady, unhurried, and said, "I think life is better now." It wasn't a declaration of love, but it didn't need to be. I reached for her hand across the table, fingers brushing before settling there. She didn't pull away. She only squeezed back lightly, eyes lowering in that shy, careful way she had when she meant more than she said. And in that moment, I realized we didn't need anything else. Not clarity, not perfection, just this. Just us, figuring it out in silence, one small routine at a time. I don't know if the world would call it love, but it was ours, and that was enough. When I think back on it now, the coffee shop, the folded napkin, the laundry hum, the bench at 8:47, I see the same thread running through all of it. A quiet, unfinished sentence that only she and I could complete.